Welcome, Dr. James Beckett, Sports Card Insights, an episode that's actually taken from the SABR Annual Convention, number 53, so they're a little bit ahead of the National Sports Collectors Convention, only 45, but a longtime friend of mine, Paul Rogers, asked me if I would come to the SABR Convention and make some remarks, answer some questions. I said I'd be delighted to. And he knows Rich, and I said, why don't Rich and I do it? Because I think that would be fun to bring some color to it. Rich is very up on SABR. I've watched it from a distance. I love what they're doing. Thanks sponsors, Topps Panini, Upper Deck, Heritage Auctions, Huggins Scott Auctions, Mike Stadium Sports Cards, Burbank Sports Cards, Beckett Media, Beckett Grading, Beckett Authentication, Topps, Upper Deck, and Panini. So thanks, Paul Rogers. Thanks also Jason Schwartz, who's the card subsection within SABR. So I've known those guys for a while. I was honored to receive the Burdick Award from SABR, and so this was just an opportunity for me to partly say thank you and enjoy the interaction with the 500 or so members that were there. Here it is, and thanks, Rich. Over time, you get very attached not just to a card or some cards, but for me it was all cards. I never really thought I'd work in the industry or be in sports, but I love sports. And I think I always saw it as a hobby, and my hobby turned into a business. Now you might say if your hobby turns into business, you need a new hobby. No, I thought I'm going to keep it as a hobby, keep it as a business, and when I sold my company, I went back to being a hobbyist. And I'll tell you what, it's more fun being a hobbyist than being in business.
I think you're enjoying life more too now than you were when you were a CEO. We had, in 1993, 183 people at the peak? When you're responsible for literally the livelihoods of not just 183 people, but families involved, there's a lot of pressure on you. When you're collecting for yourself and you're trying to downsize 1% of your collection a month, that's a lot less pressure. You're saying, I can enjoy it, and I can even buy cards that'll help me downsize.
I'm curious, Jim, when you started the PhD program at SMU and you got PhD in statistics, did you have baseball cards, the hobby in mind at all?
I was a collector at that point. In fact, one of the very early SABR members, the only of the first 100 SABR members that was from Texas and was from Dallas. And if you all remember Lee Milazzo.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
And he's passed away now, and I think his wife has even passed away, but he was a longtime archivist at SMU. So I met him, I met Gervis Ford, my longtime friend, and we had a store partnership at one point. But these were wonderful guys that love baseball, love collecting. Now Lee, being a SABR guy, he was an archivist. He was very detail-oriented, very difficult to trade with. So I didn't partner up in business with Lee. I partnered up with Gervis. So the relational aspects of being in a hobby with guys that can become lifelong friends was just awesome. Very blessed to stumble into it at SMU. Back when I was still in grad school, we organized the first card show in Dallas, the first card collecting club.
By the way, on Jim's podcast, we discussed that first card show once. Every vendor ran out of money. They bought so much stuff at that show. And one thing to remember is that in those days, cards were so much cheaper than today. As a matter of fact, we used to worry because when people like me got hired in 1989 and 90, Jim was always worried that you guys are so attuned, you're going to want us to raise all the prices in the price guide. It was counterintuitive. The exact opposite thing happened.
Rich, you mentioned when you were at Columbia, you thought you were going to work in the industry.
Yes. I was doing shows by 79, my sophomore year.
Okay.
Beginning with my sophomore year, and then through the end of my college career, my parents paid tuition, and I paid everything else from baseball cards. And there were other people like Joe Esposito of B&E Collectibles. He paid his way through St. John's with his baseball cards. There were a lot of people in those days. It was cheaper. My Columbia education, we figured it out once, was like $39,995. It came in under $40,000. Now you might not get a term at Columbia for $40,000. You could do things a lot cheaper in those days. But I always understood And this is weird, but I've talked about this with Dr. Jim. The card spoke to me. I would look at these 60s and 70s cards, and I remember watching them play on TV or reading about them in the sporting news and saying, they're speaking to me. They're telling me their sports lives, so cards became part of what I became. And I knew I wanted to spend my life doing that.
Was there ever a time in your lives when you left the hobby?
It was always there, but really it wasn't until the 70s that I got into the national aspect of being a collector, that there were people all over the country, probably all over the world, but mainly all over the country at that point. And at that point, I've never looked back. On the other hand, when the company got so busy, I got kicked upstairs. And I wound up having to be like a CEO, which is like a dirty word for me because it meant I didn't get to do anything except encourage other people and motivate other people to do the stuff that I really wanted to do. And so I couldn't be as hands-on with the cards. And that was not as much fun. So when I sold the company, I got margin back and I got my cards back.
You were a very good CEO, by the way, so don't sell yourself short on that. I can vouch for that. And for me, maybe like 75, 76 are my, we'll call it down years. The only thing I really did in 75 and 76, I went to one of the local store and I bought a 75 top set. I bought a 76 top set. And they're great sets, but there weren't variations. There weren't real reasons to buy the packs. It was a boring thing. And then by Christmas of 76, it's, hey, here's an ad in the sporting news for the Trader Speaks. Let me subscribe to that. Sure, you're graduating from high school. You'll need something to do. Then a few months later, let me subscribe to Sports Collectors Digest. First issue of Sports Collectors Digest I ever got was April 15th, 1977, was dated that. So there were a couple down years, but once I came back, I never left.
But Trader Speaks, which was Dan Dishley, one of the founding fathers of SABR, was a good friend of Rich and mine, and I also was a subscriber to that. And it was a hobby publication that he put out, but it had some SABR influence in it.
I once bought a collection that had all the Trader Speaks in it, so I actually read, also trying to get information for the books and the almanacs, and it was amazing for the first 3 or 4 years of his publication how intertwined the whole idea of baseball research was with the magazine, The Trader Speaks. As I said, he's one of the 16 founding members in 1971 in Cooperstown. That's a long time ago.
Jim, talk about how your idea to start the pricing guides and how it evolved.
It was, I think, audacious in that I sought counsel from people who unanimously said, you're crazy, can't be done, or why would you want to do that? But I knew I could do it. The audacity was really trying to be comprehensive. There were other people trying to get a handle on what certain cards were selling for, but I thought this hobby will never get to the next level unless every card has a price in different condition, and there would be full understanding of supply and demand in a hobby that has increasingly huge numbers of SKUs populating as we speak. But in those days, it still was very difficult. But I was a very active dealer, so I had a base of knowledge. I had good relationships with the dealers and collectors around the country. I was hitting the big shows and just jumped in. And it took a year to get the first one, and then after that, you're updating something. So my big contribution, getting something out. There's a lot of people that think about things, get started on things, but I thought, I'm not just thinking about it or getting started, I'm going to finish it. And after I finished it, I realized I had a tiger by the tail, that this was going to be an annual production. And it was a labor of love, but it started out being emphasis on love, then after it became emphasis on labor. Thankfully, I had fabulous teammates, including Rich. Part of what we were doing, Paul, was not just the price guides, it was the cataloging aspect, which really ties in with SABR. We were cataloging all these sets, mainly Major League Baseball, but even minor leagues and other kinds of obscure subjects. You can't price something if you don't know what it is or you don't know who it is. So we leaned heavily and had quite a bit of overlap with SABR and some of the biographical stuff. And Rich was masterful. Rich really took the cataloging efforts that I had to the next level because he had access to all of you. Because if you don't know the players and don't know the game, then you don't know if the price reporting that you get is an anomaly, an error, a mistaken identity. But if you do know all those things, then you can say this is not an outlier. We could bring order out of the chaos of just all these cards, and they all have different prices. But if we did it right, they could look them up and have confidence that the dealer and the collector were each getting a fair deal. They could meet in the middle.
Let's talk about how the hobby's changed.
In the beginning, it was all about vintage, and probably SABR started the same way. You're researching the older stuff. But Bill James is my same age. He came out and he was using SABR metrics to look at the current players and the prospects, different ways of mining the data to figure out who's really good, who's an undiscovered diamond in the rough, the money ball kind of stuff, who's the overlooked person that's really contributing to winning. So sports cards, same thing. You're trying to make sense out of the data. You're mining the data. You're digging deep into it. You're getting in the weeds. And like Rich is saying, there's new weeds every month. Just like in baseball, there's new call-ups, and they're part of your home team. So in the 70s, it started out being a hobby of nostalgia. And in the 80s, it probably still was. The late 80s, we started to get heavy marketing efforts from more than just Topps. There was a lot of competition with Donruss and Fleer, and then Upper Deck came along and Score. So you had a lot of marketing muscle and dollars going into the current year cards. And that market actually got a little overheated. Then you get into the late 90s, they started creating scarcity, contrived supply constraints with parallels and inserts. And that continues on to this day. But again, my roots were in historical, vintage, old-time baseball. But the action, as Rich said, in the monthly magazine, we could do that, but we also had to be really on point with what came out the month before.
Many of us, if and when we went to card stores, they were more nostalgia-based, more card collector-based, maybe groups of commons behind showcases. Now, it's hard to go to a card store and buy really old cards. You have to get those at the shows or mail order or eBay. And it's a business decision because you make more money per square foot if you have supplies and easily replaceable things instead of cards that you're selling for a quarter each. Now, I love those old stores with the quarter each, but if you're making a business decision, you can't do that. You have to do what keeps you in business and keeps your employees going.
So the demand aspect is if you go into a store, the store needs to have not what is scarce, but what is plentiful. It's plentiful enough that people can demand it. You have to have what the people want. And they want what their other friends have, not what nobody has. And so it's flipped. Of course, it's been 50 years, but it's flipped.
It seems to me one change in the hobby. When we were all in the hobby, you were talking about how we all love baseball.
The original people all love baseball.
Yeah.
Now, you don't have to love baseball.
Yeah.
They love money. There's a financial motivation that might be primary. It might not be the only thing, but it's certainly primary, and it wasn't in the old days.
So there's this bifurcation between vintage and modern. As a vintage guy, when you start talking about modern stuff and chase cars, I just fog over. How do you keep track of both? Are you interested in both?
I love all
Jim?
cards. It's just I love some more than others. My first love were the older cards, but if you're going to be in this industry, especially in the roles Rich and I had, you really had to have a broad understanding of what people were looking for, supply and demand. But the cards now are technologically or graphically far superior. But I'm still nostalgic.
By the way, Jim's understating it. If you ever see him at a card show, he loves the old cards, but he's in value boxes looking at new cards. And because he wants to see cards he never had before. So he actually likes looking at these 25, 50 cent, $1, $2 cards. And usually the people we deal with at the Dallas Card Show, we're regular customers, so they treat us accordingly. But he gets a lot of very interesting new cards that way, so don't let him fool you. He's just as much into the new cards as he is the old cards.
Let's talk about going to a museum. If you went to New York City, do you want to go to the Metropolitan Museum of Art every time you go to New York City? Or would you like to spread around and go? That's awesome. But there are many other great museums there. That's the way I look at it. The vintage cards are like the Metropolitan Museum of Art, which actually had the greatest card collection in it with the Jefferson Burdick collection pasted in. But to go there every single time. So I'm broadening out. I want to learn. There's more than just the old masters in art. There's modern art. There's other forms of expression. So as Rich said, yeah, I'm on a learning journey, and I'm not going to stop learning. I'm still learning about older baseball, but I'm learning about newer baseball too.
Is doing golf.